Welcome to the Building a Strong Preservation Program webinar series. My name is Madeline Kleitz, State Coordinator for the Texas Certified Local Government Program. Before we jump into the training, I'd like to tell you a little bit about the series that we have put together. The Texas Main Street Program and the Certified Local Government Program identified a need to help historic preservation officers, landmark commissioners, Main Street managers, and city staff better understand the different components that make up a successful local preservation program. This series is meant to be watched in order, and it covers local designation, preservation ordinances, design guidelines, design review, and preservation incentives. Our hope is that you will use the information presented in this series to start or build upon your local preservation efforts. Please feel free to reach out to us if you have any questions, comments, or suggestions. Our contact information is at the end of each presentation. As I mentioned, the Building a Strong Preservation Program is a collaborative effort between the Certified Local Government and the Texas Main Street programs. The Certified Local Government, or CLG program, is a partnership between the federal, state, and local government. Administered at the state level, the program provides training, technical assistance, and grant opportunities to the 73 participating communities in Texas. To find out more about becoming a CLG, check out our website or follow up with me using the contact information at the end of the presentation. The mission of the Texas Main Street program is to provide technical expertise, resources, and support for Texas communities in the preservation and revitalization of historic downtowns and commercial neighborhood districts in accord with the National Main Street Four-Point Approach of organization, economic restructuring, design, and promotion. The Texas Main Street staff work with the 89 designated communities to help them reach their revitalization and preservation goals through this framework. Check out the Texas Main Street website to learn more. The first training in this series is on local designation. Generally, we find that cities have a system in place to designate and protect historic structures, but in many cases, they haven't designated any buildings since the passing of the ordinance, or it has been so long that they're not sure where to begin the designation process. After this webinar, you'll know more about the different types of designations, the typical process to designate a local landmark or district, and how properties that are designated are actually protected. We admit that understanding the different designation types can be confusing. Here we break it up into national, state, and local designations. At the national level, you have the National Register for Historic Places and National Historic Landmarks. At the state level, you have the Recorded Texas Historic Landmark, or RTHL, and the State Antiquities Landmark, or SAL. Finally, at the local level, a city will typically have local historic districts and local historic landmarks. The National Register of Historic Places is a federal program administered in our state by the Texas Historical Commission in coordination with the National Park Service. Properties can be listed on the National Register either individually or as a district. A listing on the National Register alone does not protect the property from insensitive alterations or demolitions, and it's primarily honorary. However, a listing on the National Register can help a property owner qualify for CLG grants as well as state and federal historic rehabilitation tax credits. This photo is from the Lost Bayou National Register Historic District in Galveston. The nomination was prepared with assistance from a CLG grant. A National Historic Landmark is a property with exceptional value at the national level, kind of like a step above a listing on the National Register. Similar to the National Register, it's primarily honorary, and because National Historic Landmarks are so exceptional, they're kind of rare. There are less than 50 in Texas. This is a photo of Casa Navarro, one of the historic sites operated by the Texas Historical Commission. The site was designated as a National Historic Landmark in 2016. At the state level, there is the Recorded Texas Historic Landmark, or RTHL. The THC reviews exterior alterations and demolitions of these properties. RTHLs and subject markers can often look the same. However, on the marker it should read Recorded Texas Historic Landmark. If you're not sure, call the THC and we'll help you determine if the property is designated. Also at the state level, there's the State Antiquities Landmark, or SAL. Only properties on non-federal public lands are eligible, so think courthouses, schools, and libraries. Properties designated as SALs are protected under the Antiquities Code of Texas, and exterior alterations and demolitions are reviewed by the THC. So this training is going to focus on local designation. Throughout this process, keep in mind that each community has a different ordinance, so the definitions that I use and the processes that I describe are not intended to give you specific instruction. You'll need to study your community's preservation ordinance to determine the specifics for your town. So most cities have created a program to designate an individual property known as a local landmark, or a group of buildings known as a local historic district. Keep in mind that there will be overlap between the federal, state, and local designations. That's where it can get confusing, especially when the boundaries are only slightly different. Having a well-maintained map of designated properties and districts in your community can be really helpful for property owners and city officials. Some of our CLGs have great interactive maps which are available to the public and even list information about historic resources. It's also helpful to have definitions of the different designation types on a handout, brochure, or listed someplace highly visible on the city's website. Local designations provide the most protection for historic resources. This is done through zoning. Once a property is designated and zoned historic, the exterior alterations and demolition of that property must be reviewed. In Texas, Chapter 211 of the Local Government Code gives cities the ability to do this. The Local Preservation Ordinance is the vehicle cities use to designate landmarks and districts. It's not enough to simply have a preservation ordinance. You must use it to designate the significant resources in your town. The next training in this series will review preservation ordinances more in depth. So let's take a closer look at local landmarks. Once a property is designated as a local landmark, it will be recognized as a significant resource in the community, and the property owners may be able to take advantage of local incentives such as tax abatements. Responsibilities also come with owning a local historic landmark, such as keeping the property well maintained and not letting it fall into a state of disrepair. Any exterior modifications or partial or full demolition will also need to be reviewed by the local landmark commission. These regulations often apply to all improvements or demolitions on the parcel, not just the main structure. So for example, a carriage house or a garage behind the building would also be included. A local historic district consists of two or more buildings within a definable geographic area. Districts cover both commercial and residential neighborhoods, and each historic district should be comprised of contributing and non-contributing properties. The contributing status of a building is established when the district is created. Simply put, a contributing property reflects the values that give a historic district its distinctive historical and visual character, where a non-contributing property does not add to the historic associations, historic architectural qualities, or archaeological values for which a district is significant. You'll need to pay close attention to your local preservation ordinance to see how contributing and non-contributing buildings are handled. For example, is the design review process the same? In some cities, non-contributing structures are only reviewed for demolition and new construction. The THC recommends that all properties located in a local historic district, regardless of contributing or non-contributing status, be subject to local design guidelines. So you might ask, what's the advantage of a district compared to a bunch of historic landmarks? Well, historic districts allow cities to designate properties that may not be significant on their own, but collectively they convey a visual sense of the overall historic environment. Local historic districts are designated and zoned historic. They can be commercial or residential. Main Street districts are a separate commercial classification, but can include or overlap with downtown historic districts. Make sure you know where the boundaries lie to avoid confusion. Here's a map of Kingsville's local historic district outlined in blue. As you can see, the Main Street district, outlined in red, is included in the local historic district. Similar to local historic landmarks, the properties located within the boundaries of the local historic district are subject to design review. Keep in mind that guidelines might be different for each property based on their contributing or non-contributing status. Properties in a local historic district may also be eligible for local financial incentives. For example, some cities give tax relief to property owners who are part of a newly formed historic district as a way to encourage the creation of more districts. We'll talk more about preservation incentives later in the Building a Strong Preservation Program series, so stay tuned. This series will cover design guidelines and standards in more detail in a subsequent training. However, it's important to know that design guidelines can be applied to all locally designated properties, or they can be adopted for specific districts. For example, the Kenwood Court Local Historic District in Fort Worth has a specific set of design guidelines for the properties in that district. In a different approach, Wichita Falls addresses all locally designated historic resources, districts, and landmarks with one set of design guidelines. Another advantage to historic districts is the ability to positively influence new development. Districts can include vacant lots or non-contributing buildings can be demolished. When this happens, the local preservation commission has the ability to review what is built in its place. This review often leads to better and more sensitive design. Take this example from a set of local design guidelines. In this neighborhood, it's recommended that new construction match the scale and mass of the properties in the district. So maybe you have an idea of what needs to be locally designated in your community, but where do you begin? First, you need to consult your local preservation ordinance to learn what the criteria is for designating a landmark or district. Or for our Main Street folks, find out if you have a preservation ordinance. What is the criteria for designating a landmark or district in your community? Is owner consent required for designation? Is a percentage of owner consent required for the creation of a district? What does the application look like? Who fills it out? These are all questions that the preservation ordinance should address. Second, it's very important to have updated information on the resources that you're interested in protecting. This comes from a historic resources survey. A survey helps a community identify its historic buildings and includes recommendations for areas or sites primed for designation. Keeping the survey updated is critical to identifying future landmarks and districts. What wasn't historic in the late 1980s when the last survey was done may now very well be historic, so it's very important to update regularly. On the left is a snapshot of the City of Palestine's website. They've done a great job of making the applicable preservation laws easily acceptable to the public through their website. On the right is the cover of a recently completed historical resources survey from the City of Tyler. a project partially funded by a CLG grant. So just because they are so important, we wanted to give you a little more information about historic resources surveys. So they identify, prioritize, map, and photograph a community's historic resources. Sometimes city staff can take on a new survey project or survey update. However, if staff are not trained or they don't have the time, consultants may be hired to complete a survey. Either way, the THC can help you get started on a survey project. So please contact the CLG program or the THC survey coordinator for more information. In 2014, the Palestine HPO and volunteers updated their historic resources survey of downtown with the help of a CLG grant. Here's a map from one of our CLG communities. The different colors represent the different historic districts. In this case, we recommended that the city work on updating their historic resources survey with a specific focus on the gap areas between the districts where many of the buildings are of historic age. Again, we can't stress the importance of historic resource surveys enough, so keep them updated. The process to officially designate a historic landmark is very specific to your local preservation ordinance. However, we wanted to give you an example of the typical path to designation. Usually applications are initiated by the property owners, but the Preservation Commission may also have the authority to start the designation process. Staff are usually pretty involved with the preparation of the application, and once complete, staff presents the completed application along with a recommendation to the Commission. In most cities, the Preservation Commission makes a recommendation to the Planning and Zoning Commission, who then makes a recommendation to City Council. Once City Council approves the designation, the zoning map for the city is officially changed and the designation is recorded with the deed of the property. The designation of a historic district follows a similar process. However, it's important to understand if owner support is necessary, and if so, what percentage of owners must support the application and at what point in the process. In a recent study of Texas CLGs, we found that owner support in the designation of historic districts is not specified in the majority of preservation ordinances. This is something that is really up to the community. However, 20% of owner support when the application is submitted is our recommendation. Additional steps in the application process includes the determination of contributing and non-contributing properties and the boundaries of the district. Both of these items must be determined before the district is officially designated by City Council. Again, this is where the Historic Resources Survey will come in handy. Please see the handouts associated with this webinar for more information about determining the boundaries of a historic district. Sometimes it's been a long time since a community has designated a property and they don't have a good template for a landmark or district application. Here's a list of what is usually included in that application. The most important part is the applicant's argument for why the property meets the criteria set forth in the ordinance. What if you don't have an application for designation? Look at the ordinance, look at some examples, and then make your own. Many applications follow a similar style to the National Register nomination application. See the handouts for a few good examples. Once you have an application, make sure people know where it is and how to fill it out. Hold trainings, workshops, or webinars. Meet with property owners to encourage designation. The process to designate a landmark or district can be confusing, especially when you consider all of the players involved. This chart explains the role of the various players, including the Historic Preservation Officer, the Preservation Commission, and the property owner throughout the process from initiation to recordation. For example, you'll see that it's primarily city staff's job to assist either the commission or the property owner with completing the application for local designation. The HPO is also charged with making sure that the path to designation follows the local law and that proper and timely notices are sent to the appropriate people. In the case of local historic districts, everyone should work together to make sure there is adequate public outreach and education of property owners in the potential district. The success of the application often hinges on this. This chart is available as a handout associated with this webinar if you'd like to learn more. In conclusion, remember that not all designations are created equal. Each type of designation at the federal, state, and local level offer different recognition and protection for historic resources. Local designation offering the most protection. And I'll say it again, local designation offering the most protection. Also, it's critical to keep historic resource surveys updated in order to identify and designate properties in a proactive way. And finally, as I've said throughout this webinar, it's so important for you to read your preservation ordinance so that you know the criteria and the process specific to your community. The CLG program is always able to help you in this regard. If you have questions about interpreting your ordinance or just questions in general about what your city code is saying, we're happy to help. Thank you so much for attending this first training in the Building a Strong Preservation Program webinar series. Up next, we'll take an in-depth look at the Preservation Ordinance.